Did you stalk the audience?
Yeah, he did. He's got buddies. All right, it's 2 o'clock. You guys good?
Yeah.
Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Julie Peterson. On behalf of our church's Adult Ed and Public Affairs team, thank you so much for being here today. Our transitional senior minister, Jeff Pinga, is with us. Jeff, where are you? He's all the way in the back. Last seat. If you get a chance to meet him, please do. And we offer you the warmest of welcomes to our church to today's conversation with Leland Vittert about his memoir, Born Lucky. And before we begin, if you haven't already, please can you silence your phones? Thank you. And a couple of the quick thank yous. Leland, Ben. The Winnetka Bookstore, connecting us with HarperCollins, which led to you, Leland, and for managing today's book signing, which you're all invited to in the room just behind these double doors right over here. They've been terrific. Our amazing Adult Ed and Public Affairs team, who's greeting all of you when you came in and collecting your questions, thank you. They are intellectually curious and compassionate, and just a fabulous committee. And then thank you for valuing community and conversation, important conversations like we do here at Kenilworth Union. And of course, a huge thank you to our featured speaker, Leland Vittert, and moderator Ben Bradley. Leland took a plane early this morning from the East Coast to be here with us today. We're really lucky. Thank you both for the opportunity.
I drove from Hinsdale, so not all heroes wear capes.
Yeah, that's a long drive.
Took about the same amount of time.
Probably, yeah.
Our Public Affairs and Committee and Adult Ed Committee aims for meaningful community engagement through excellent faith-based spiritual study, but also more secular topics like global affairs, government, history, science, public policy. We hope to create space for safe, open, respectful discussion of complex issues and to help all of us cultivate informed perspectives. Today's esteemed guest speaker, Leland Vittert, wrote Born Lucky. It was an instant New York Times bestseller. And Leland serves as the host, as you probably know, of the primetime weeknight newscast On Balance at 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern. And he's the chief Washington, D.C. anchor for NewsNation. Before that, he worked several years as a foreign correspondent in Jerusalem and as anchor and correspondent for Fox News in our nation's capital. Leland grew up in St. Louis and attended Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Ben Bradley has been a fixture in Chicago news media world more than 25 years. He's been with WGN-TV since 2017. He joined, which is when I think you joined the WGN Investigates team. He anchors the channel's 4 p.m. news every day. He's won 10 Emmy Awards. You must have a very big bookshelf. That's a lot of Emmys.
My wife doesn't let me display them.
For investigative reporting and breaking news coverage. He's born and raised in South suburban Chicago. He studied journalism at the University of Missouri-Columbia. We're thrilled to have you both, and with that, I will pass it to you, Ben and Leland.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for having a discussion. I think in this day and age, this is so important to have people in one room talking, whatever the topic. It's rare, and it's for those of us who speak into a camera for a living, not knowing if anyone's on the other side, it is rejuvenating to talk in person. So Leland and I got to know each other when NewsNation was founded, and it took off shortly. It took off in the middle of the pandemic, and shortly after it was founded, Leland joined and moved to Chicago, not knowing many people, to launch this show. And I hope we all realize how lucky we were that our parent company, Nexstar Media, said, we want to do this grand experiment where we are not going to be partisan ideologues. We are going to try to be down the middle. We're going to talk to every side and inform the public. And this radical idea, we're going to base it in Chicago, right? And it took off. It's doing well. Leland moved to Washington, D.C. We continue to be friends. And what I love about NewsNation is, unlike a CNN or a Fox News, when there's a big story in Chicago, they don't parachute in a reporter. They come to a local reporter who has the history and the perspective. So Leland, thank you all for
It's
including
increasingly difficult to book Ben, though. His agent keeps demanding
Yes,
higher
yes.
and higher fees.
Listen, little did I know when we met that I would be friends with a New York Times best-selling author. That's pretty cool. So let's get this started by, when I read the book, what I was taken away by your father's commitment to you, especially at a time when I think a father wouldn't quit his job to raise his kid, and B, to not coddle you. So tell me this story of his choices that he made.
Well, Ben, I'm actually impressed you read the book. I didn't know.
It's on the teleprompter in the back.
So when I was about 8 years old, I was told, or my parents were told, that they needed to have me evaluated, right? Which is the worst thing any parent can hear. And so they take me to one of those medical testing buildings where you got a lot of different medical offices, and walk in, linoleum floors, stale coffee, old magazines, uncomfortable furniture. We've all been there. Yep. Woman takes me away for a couple of hours and brings me back. And when she brings me back, she says to my parents, "You've got a lot of problems here." First, blunt. It's interesting, I normally tell these stories either on radio or TV, so you don't hear the audience reaction. But she said there's three main issues. One is behavioral. So I really wasn't invited to any kind of birthday parties or play dates or hung out with kids, but if I was with a kid or in class or whatever, and a kid looked at me wrong or touched me or whatever, I would turn around and slug them. So behavioral issue was number one. Second major issue was sensory. So if I had on socks I didn't like or a jacket I didn't like or anything like that, I would just sort of melt down. And then the third issue was what we would now call real learning disabilities. So an IQ test, which is one of the things they gave me at this evaluation, is the average of 2 scores. And a learning disability is a 20-point spread between those 2 scores. I had a 70-point spread. The woman said we'd never seen anybody with a spread that big. So my dad goes, as any parent would, and he had been successful in life at doing things that people had said were difficult to do. Okay, what do we do about it? And the woman said, there's not much you could do about it. And he goes, okay, what do we do about it? And she goes, you really have to meet him where he is. And my dad thought that where I was a disaster, and would have been a disaster if I had stayed there. So he worked, in his mind was, he decided, I am going to figure out how to adapt Lucky to the world rather than the world to Lucky.
We should stop. Lucky
is my nickname, which title of the book. So he had to begin to teach me in a very granular level the social and human equation interaction that comes so naturally to people and so naturally to someone like Ben. So one of a number of things he did was he would take me out to lunch on Saturdays or Sundays with his friends. And the deal was I could go to lunch, which was great because I had no interaction with anybody my own age. But when he tapped his watch, I had to stop talking, was the rule. And for example, I would have loved to have gone to lunch with Ben Bradley because I loved news and politics and business, the only things I could talk about because that was all my dad and I talked about. And before we would have sat down at the table, I would have been peppering Ben with, who writes your scripts? Somebody else. Who writes your questions? Somebody else. How do you decide?
This doesn't work, Leland. My watch must not be nice enough.
So my dad would eventually very quickly tap his watch, as Ben just did, and that was my note to, one, stop talking, but two, to bookmark whatever the event was. And then when we got in the car, we would post-game this moment or moments of, okay, so when Ben was talking about his golf game and you interrupted to ask about who writes his scripts or how TV advertising is sold or whatever, what made you think that was a good idea? Well, gee, Dad, that's what I was interested in. Okay, well, what could you have asked Mr. Bradley that he would have been interested in? And this was the very beginnings of trying to mold, if you want to say, or adapt me and make me realize that my understanding of the human and social equation didn't work, and if I wanted to interact in the world, how to change that.
But to a degree, we all have that affliction. I mean, my wife would tell you that my stories, because my stories on television are limited to a minute and a half, my stories in real life go on forever. So I should tell you, my wife for years was a classroom teacher for kids with autism and profound disabilities, and she still works in public schools now training special ed staff, another reason why this book really resonated with me. But my wife would tell you that not every behavior is, you can't train out every behavior, and I guess I'm living proof of that. So at what point did your dad, in the, late 80s was this, say, oh, you know what? No one's talking about autism. There aren't behavior coaches as there are today. The schools aren't equipped to it. Why did your dad decide, we're not going to cater to you, Leland, you are going to have to rise up or fail?
Well, it was a very conscious decision on his part. I think he, one, thought it was possible. And two, he said, I didn't know how it was going to end up, but I had to try. So I think he would tell you, and I think the most important part of the book is the afterword. He would say, I didn't know how it was going to end up. And for many months, years, he thought, this is never going to change, and I was failing. The reason we wrote the book is, and told the story, because obviously when you and I met, you had no idea what the past had been, is to not say to every parent, hey, you can turn your autistic kid into a TV news anchor, but to say to every parent that your kid can be more and does not have to be defined by a diagnosis. And I think about we had this idea that a few parents would read the book and think how great this is. The response, to Ben's point from the beginning of in this polarized world, we've done interviews from Joe Scarborough on the left to Steve Bannon on the right. And every single host has come away saying that this is a message that is universal. It is not a political message, it's a message of hope. And I think about a story that a father told me a couple of months ago. He called, and his son has profound autism, which I know is something that your wife has worked with. And his son was in a group home and having all sorts of behavior issues, all sorts of difficulties. The one thing that the kid liked to do, according to the reports that came back from the group home, was he liked to go to the rec center and swim 3 days a week. And the dad said, well, if he likes to go splash around in the pool and is happiest splashing around in the pool, why don't we teach him to swim? Group home says, no, you can't teach a 21-year-old autistic nonverbal kid how to swim, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems, and he's going to get scared, and he's going to hate the pool, and on and on and on. Father said, I think if he's happiest in the pool, we should try to lean into that. Let's teach him to swim. Kid now swims 1.5 miles every morning.
Wow.
And he is profoundly happy. He gets up every morning and gets ready to go swimming, and he is completely changed physically, and he's completely changed mentally, all because a father said, I think my son can be more. And that really is the story.
And that, I think, gets to this push and pull that we are seeing in our society, right? We see it in our schools, we see it in our politics of, do we, cater to someone's needs? Do we cater to somebody's pronouns? Do we cater to somebody's skill level? Do we cater? You can go across the spectrum and say, and you see this in the political show you do every night, is that everything does become politicized, right? For some people, if you use their chosen pronouns, you are woke and you are catering to them. And to the other side, if you meet somebody where they are in a attempt to be caring, if you don't do that, you're an awful person. So I guess I wonder, I do think part of why your book resonated is because of the time we are in and this notion of, do we meet people where they are, or do we expect more of people? Do we respect what they tell us they want? I mean, it's a panacea.
Yeah, it is. The issue of teaching kids they can do hard things is one that proved to be very important for me, right? Is that, and I think rightly speaking, I'm assuming most of you all are parents, that any parent wants to take away the adversity and the pain that their children are going through. It's a natural parental feeling. The problem is then a kid doesn't learn they can do hard things. And what my dad did was, rather than take away the adversity and ask for accommodations and tell schools, hey, he has this diagnosis, and thus gain the protections and the extra time on tests and everything else, he said, I'm going to hold your hand through the adversity, which is a whole lot harder as a parent to do than to sort of let the schools make everything as easy as possible, and they will. So where this comes full circle, I think, is you take, when I was in school and the principal in 7th grade, 7th through 12th grade school, I've been now through 4 or 5 schools, the principal calls my parents in 2 weeks in to the principal's office, not something any parent wants to show up for. And the principal says to my parents, everybody at this school thinks your son is really weird. And frankly, I do too. Which meant that everything that would happen to me over the next 5 or 6 years was going to be my fault, right? They could have very easily at that point said, look, you have to understand he has these problems, you can't call him weird, you have to accommodate everything, on and on. They didn't, they walked out. A year later, we have a rule on TV that if your phone goes off, you have to answer it on TV.
Yeah, on speakerphone.
Yeah. So the next year, I'm in art class. A teacher doesn't think I'm going to become Picasso. And, well, he was right, to be fair. But he says in front of the entire class, hey, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I would shave its rear end and make it walk backwards. Didn't say rear end. I figured I would edit the language for where we are. So I go home that night. I tell my dad how humiliated and hurt I am, which I did pretty much every day. And he was there every day at 4:15 when I came home. And I would spend a couple of hours taking out my hurt and my frustration and my anger and the difficulties in isolation and emotional torture on him. I later learned as we wrote the book that a lot of times he would end up in the living room once I had gone to bed crying himself by himself. But I would go to school the next day. He would take me back to school. He made me face that adversity over and over. And it came full circle. As Ben knows a little bit of this story, at the end of 2020, I was invited not to return to Fox News because I was the only anchor to question Trump's claims that he won the election.
Invited not to return is such a beautiful way to say it, isn't it? Are you going to give him the quote?
I'll let you do that. Considering where we are, who wants to?
Yeah, there's a fabulous quote that came out in the Fox News depositions in the voting machines case about Leland Vittert from none other than Tucker Carlson. Leland had the audacity to, on Fox News in 2020, suggest that maybe the election wasn't stolen, and here is what our reporting indicates. Tucker's response.
So at that moment, there were a few things going on. There was an email from Lachlan Murdoch to the executives at Fox News that said Leland's done. And we now know from the Dominion lawsuit that they got a hold of Tucker Carlson's texts. And Tucker Carlson was texting Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham in a thread. And he said, we go and create Fox News, and Leland effing Vittert goes and destroys it. That's a meaningful quote to Ben Bradley, because when I left Chicago to go to Washington, D.C., he gave me a desk plate that said Leland effing Vittert, Tucker Carlson. Now you know what kind of friend he is.
And he just told me that he used that in a meeting with the Nexstar board of directors. So perhaps I'll be invited not to return.
No, I think it worked out pretty well. I didn't tell them where I got it.
Okay, good.
But in the same 3 months or 2 months, invited not to return to Fox News. I ended a long-term relationship and didn't have a place to live, and almost died of COVID. So I'm now out of the hospital from COVID and at my parents' house, sort of feeling the way I did in 8th grade, right? And I am really low. All of my possessions are in one backpack. And my dad says to me one night, he goes, "You're feeling pretty sorry for yourself, aren't you?" And I said, "Oh, I am." And he goes, "All right, 38 years old, you have no career, you have no job, no girlfriend." It's like a country song. And
were you driving a pickup truck at the
no.
time? Because that would complete the image.
I didn't have a car. I lost my car. So he says to me, he goes, "You're feeling pretty low, aren't you?" And I said, "Uh-huh." And he goes, "Well," he goes, "I get it." He says, "But in 8th grade, you went back to school every day. And if you went back to school every day after the teacher compared you disfavorably to his dog's rear end, you can get back and start fighting again." And that really is what this story is about, teaching a kid resilience. What my dad didn't tell me was that 8th grade would be about the best training anyone could possibly get for a newsroom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
notoriously empathetic places to work.
Yes. You don't have knife wounds in your back, you have them in your front.
Yeah.
In newsrooms, but I think to your point about sort of the times we're in, and we're seeing this, right? We've seen it come full circle. The Atlantic just had a piece out that said 40% of the kids at Stanford University now have an accommodation of one type or another. And it quotes a professor as saying, there's actually more kids in the distraction-free room than there are in the normal test room. It then goes on to say, and you see this now with young kids coming to the WGN newsroom, I see it at NewsNation, that there are so many kids who have graduated journalism school or come into the workforce who have no idea how to deal with any kind of criticism, any kind of coaching, any kind of difficulty. And you have to ask yourself, and this is something that every parent has to make their own decision on, at what point are you helping your child versus what point in making it easier versus at what point are you making it so that later on in life they don't know they can do hard things, that they become defined by their victimhood. Not
to turn this into a parenting seminar, but you thought of an experience I had a week ago with a good friend from Hinsdale, notoriously adverse-free community, much like Kenilworth, adversity-free, I should say. And he has a son at the University of Virginia, right? Incredible school. And he was supposed to get into the business school after his, I think, freshman year. And he worked his butt off and didn't get in. And both his parents, uber successful people. I said, how is Finn doing? And the dad said, we were upset about it, but I realized this is the first time that this kid from Hinsdale has probably been kicked in the stomach and has had to figure out, okay, I'm not going to get into business school, but I'm still at UVA. How do I navigate around that? And that's essentially, I think, what your dad was doing and what we as a society have struggled with the balance of, right? How do you protect your kids enough, but also allow them to get kicked in the stomach and figure out how to stand back up and go about their
this
day.
Was really the story of Dad helping me stand back up.
Yeah. So let's get to Fox News and a newsroom in general, which is a brutal environment, a lonely environment, a harsh environment, and especially at the network level.
Those are the nice newsrooms.
Yeah. Like I was never interested in going to the network because I thrive on like feedback and somebody telling me I did a good job and all of that. When I read Leland's book about his time in Jerusalem for Fox News, and I thought, boy, that's the hardest job for 50 reasons, the obvious ones, but also you're in a 3 or 4 person bureau. You have no idea what the mothership thinks about you. You're always worried, am I getting it, at the network, am I getting enough FaceTime? Do the shows want me? Oh my gosh, they haven't asked me to do a live shot in 4 days. What does that mean? I wonder how everything in your life up to that point prepared you for lack of a better term, the insecurity of our business.
It's a great question. And I think Ben's right to point out sort of the feelings of insecurity that exist in the television news world. I think it's why sort of the petty politics and the backstabbing and the snakiness of it is so significant, because the stakes are so high for people, and the in terms of actually having qualitative ways to measure are almost non-existent.
Yeah.
I mean, you have ratings, but it's a very
Right.
nebulous and ambiguous criteria. What I would say is that 8th grade was great training, right? And that if you get kicked enough and are forced to get back up enough, as I was, that you develop a very thick skin to anyone criticizing you. And I think if my mother would talk about this, I'm not sure it was spelled out in the book, but one of her real concerns as I was going through all this, and my parents were saying, okay, you're just gonna, you're going back the next day, you're getting through it. Just to sort of give you a sense of where I was when we started working on the book. And, this was never talked about in my family. This was never talked about with counselors or therapists or anything like that, or teachers, principals. The diagnosis was given, and my dad said, okay, off we go. We're never going to tell anybody. But I asked my sister what her first memories of me were. So she says, oh, that's easy. You were in 5th grade. I, meaning my sister, was in kindergarten, and every day you would come downstairs from your 5th grade classroom to my kindergarten classroom at this little community school we went to, and walk me home. It was like half mile home. And we would walk out of the school, past the PE fields to the woods, and when you got to the woods, that was the path to our house. And she said every day when you got to the woods, you would start crying, meaning me. And she would grab my hand. So you think about that as a kindergartner holding your 5th grader brother's hand as he cried and walked home every night. And my sister would ask my mom and dad, what's wrong with Lucky? And they would say, well, every day at school he's broken and we have to put him back together. Was the way they described it to her. So, a long way of answering your question, the real concern my mother always had was that I would become too hardened and sort of too impervious to criticism or having any insecurity.
Yeah.
That it sort of
the
would
good
build
news is Leland got married in the last year, so we're working on that issue as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I said, my dad's mission was to adapt me to the world, not the world to me, and my wife would tell you it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, exactly.
She's found a whole new list of things that need to be fixed.
Yes. Yeah. I remember when I met her, it was in the parking lot of WGN when you were still doing your show out of our building. I was like, wow, she is wonderful.
Yes.
I was like, Leland, she is really, really, really great. And he looks at me and he says, why do you seem so surprised?
Well, she's a very nice Kenilworth girl.
Yes. Before we do audience questions, I do want to get to a strength that I think your life's arc has given you, and I see it in your show, in the way you interview people. A lot of us, myself included, have a need to be liked. Whether that's, if we're interviewing somebody, I have no problems asking people hard, difficult questions, whether it's the governor or the mayor.
I would say Rod
or whoever.
Blagojevich
Rod Blagojevich hates me. Yeah. Has he told you that? I'm just kidding.
He didn't need to, Ben.
He told me that. What I like about your show is, I think probably comes from your life's arc, and that is there are no questions that are pandering or that are boy, I'm really lucky to have this guy on my show, so I better leave him with a warm and fuzzy, and I hope he likes me and comes back. Do you see that?
Yeah, there is a honey badger nature to my life.
Yeah.
Yes, and interestingly enough, the way the book came about, and since you all are here and either have read it or will read it, I'll give you a little bit of an insight, is I was working, and you've done this before, you work with a talent coach. Mm-hmm. So I get to NewsNation, I'm now a primetime anchor, I had only ever anchored weekends on Fox, they said you need some help. No kidding. And they had me start working with this talent coach, and the talent coach has a lot of notes for me, but one of them is that when I'm in what they call the two box, right, when you're interviewing somebody and they're not sitting next to you, but they're sitting in the other TV box, you're not matching their emotions very well. You know, you're sort of like this to their emotions. She says, you need to work on that. Okay. Week later, how's it going? I'm working on it. 2 weeks later, how's it going? She goes, do you understand what I'm saying? I said, yeah, I get it. 3 weeks. She's like, now, like, are you even trying? And I said, well, I am. I said, but you should know that this is about the hardest thing in the world for me to do, is to match someone's emotions. And she goes, okay, why? And I said, well, I'm autistic. Silence. Like 30 seconds on the phone of silence. And she goes, what'd you say? And I said, well, I'm autistic. And she said, I didn't know that. I said, well, right, nobody does. I've never told anybody, but because we're working together and you're trying to help me, I figured I'd let you know that you've got sort of a special case here. And she says, do the bosses know that? I said, nobody knows that. I've never told anybody. This is sort of what my dad did to try to help me, and very briefly told her this story. And she said, I don't believe you. Okay, I don't know what to tell you. And she goes, have you ever written anything about it? And I said, well, actually, yeah. I said, about a year ago, I was really drunk one night, and I wrote about 700 words that I thought would be an op-ed sometime for Father's Day. And I put it in my drawer. And she said, can I read it? I said, sure. So I sent her over and it was titled Born Lucky.
Wow.
And it was 700 words of basically the book. She said, thanks a lot. 3 months later, my phone rang, and it was Don Yeager, who is my co-author on the book. And Don, 12-time New York Times bestselling author, had written all of Brian Kilmeade's books, very well known in this world. And he says, I have read these 700 words, and I think this should be a book. I said, not writing a book, not interested in talking about this, not interested in talking about this publicly. And he says, you need to. And I said, why? And he said, well, I have a child who's autistic. And if I had known this story when they were diagnosed, it would have changed my life. And it would have given me hope. And that became why we decided to do this and finally talk about this, was to give families the hope that my dad did not.
It's a perfect place to transition to audience questions. First question, did you participate in any activities or sports growing up, or was it just you and the family and you weren't in school?
Great question. No activities. When I was in 8th or 9th grade, I started rowing, which was a way to get out of playing sports at my high school. There was a citywide rowing team. And that became an enormous part of my life. And it was a way, because I wasn't good at any kind of sport that required hand-eye coordination. That's why Ben wants to play golf with me. It was a great way to have something that I could be good at outside of school and have an identity.
Yeah. All right, next audience question. Not all parents experience the same outcomes in their autistic children as you did. What advice do you have for struggling parents, and what advice do you have for those of us supporting them?
Well, it's a great question. As I said, that this story is not how to turn your autistic kid or fix an autistic kid or anything like that. It's a father-son story. And I think people should take from it what they do. I don't have any advice because I'm not a parent. I'm a kid who wrote a book about my dad. The best advice to me is the afterword, which was written by my dad. And he has some thoughts in there that I think are kind of the basis of what we have said is the basis of ideas for parents of any kid who's having a hard time.
And I think it's such an important point because, autism is a spectrum, right? And you said you heard from that father whose son just wanted to splash around, right? And then he became a swimmer. I hear those stories monthly from my wife, who one of the school districts she works in is Maywood, which is, a district that is, financially struggles. They're teachers' aides who are there in the special ed classrooms make as much money as a crossing guard, right? Like, there is not a lot of support. And one of my wife's roles is to basically say to a teacher who is at wit's end with a kid who's nonverbal or non-functioning, well, what does a kid like to do? What areas does he thrive? Let's build on those areas as opposed to saying this child has to do what we want them to do. So, not an answer to the question, but something I see just from stories that Molly tells me as she comes home. Next question. Hi, Leland. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
That was it. No. In your book, you mentioned that having a dog helped you during difficult times when you were growing up. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it was a huge part. I've often said that I think kids who grow up with big dogs are better adjusted. We had a Newfoundland, I think we've now had 5, but had different Newfoundlands as we grew up. And then it's actually interesting, what my wife and I, sort of one of the things we first talked about and bonded over was, when we met, was that we both had big dogs growing up. So I think learning about unconditional love and having that bond with a creature is something that was missing in my life. Obviously, I had it from my parents, but this was something else that was extraordinarily important.
Yeah. I think as I read your book and was thinking about the loneliness that you described in your childhood, I was thinking of the loneliness I felt in my first job in Charleston, South Carolina. In TV, you moved to a city where you know no one. I was getting up at 2 a.m. to do the weather at the NBC station. You're exhausted. You're working 40 hours a day, it feels like. You have no friends.
You're on food stamps.
Yeah.
You could qualify for food stamps.
Exactly. If I could insert one of my own questions here, I do feel like so much of the adversity, the type of adversity that you face, loneliness, isolation, fear of rejection, are the things that are probably not unique to TV, but certainly were part of a lot of people's stories.
Sure, and I think it's why the book has resonated the way it has, which is it's a story that says you can do hard things.
Yeah.
And kids don't hear that enough. And I think that is, you make a point about it's the right time for this story. And I think we're just sort of seeing in the zeitgeist this shift of realizing that helping people do hard things and teaching them resilience and helping them adapt to the world is really helpful, because the world doesn't adapt to you, no matter what situation it is. You in Charleston, South Carolina, the world doesn't really care that you get up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
No.
The world doesn't care that you're tired. The world doesn't care about these things. It should. It would be great if the world of accommodations was the real world. It's just not.
It certainly prepares you for being a journalist in this day and age, because you can spend, days or weeks on a story that you think is powerful and important, and then you post it on Twitter and people really tell you what they think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the flip side of that is, and my dad wrote about this in the afterword, how much harder parents now have it because of social media.
Yeah.
The bullying comes home in a way that it did not
One of the things I have done as a parent, our boys are now 18, 17, and 13, but for the last 10 years or so, like people, if you ever want to feel better about your own life, spend some time in my Twitter replies and the stuff that people like say to me, and I'm like a local reporter in Chicago, right? Like I'm not curing cancer or covering the White House, but when people would say truly awful things about me, I would screenshot a few of them and send them on our family group text, because I thought it important that teenagers who were being exposed to social media, my kids, see that people can say whatever they want on social media, and it's not reflective of the person they know, in this case, their dad. I don't know if it worked or not, but none of my boys are in jail yet, so. Leland, would you have achieved so much career success if you hadn't dealt with the challenges and obstacles that you wrote about?
It's a very fair question, and the answer is I don't know. And there have been a lot of people who've said, well, you know, is certain things, you know, about autism a superpower? I don't know. I don't know what it's like not to be me. I think it is very fair to say that had I not had the challenges that I had being in my parents' bedroom when I was 38 years old, my parents' house, living in my parents' guest bedroom at 38 years old, I would not have had that same level of resilience. And I would just give this picture, and my dad used to tell me this on a nightly basis. There is a group of people, you know some of them, I know some of them, we all know people like this who say, you know, when you ask them about high school or college, they go, those were the best years of my life. Well, that says something, that the rest of their life has never lived up to those years.
Yeah.
And I've often said I don't like anybody who liked high school because the value system of high school is so screwed up that if you liked high school, it doesn't say about good things for you later on in life. I would say the same thing about Washington. I don't like anybody who likes Washington.
Yeah.
Because the values of Washington are so screwed up. But the carry through of that is, I think that's the answer to your question, right? You know, if you see these people who had it really easy in high school, and my dad used to say this, later in life, they don't know how to deal with the rest of life.
It's so true. The people I knew in high school who were the most popular, looked like the star quarterback or whatever, are the ones who I would say are less happy later in life. And I say that as a kid who was in the radio club in high school. Got a lot of girls. Just for the record, back then radio was a little cooler. Thank you for all you do. I would love to know how you didn't become bitter and angry with how mean people were. It's amazing how nice and open you are.
It's a great question.
You want to keep that one?
Yeah, I'm going to show this to my wife. Yeah, Ben, you didn't know how nice and open I am. I'll put this up. This is a great point. And I would say, number one, there was a lot of time I was really angry. And my dad absorbed a lot of that anger at night and on weekends and talking me through things. There comes a time when you realize, and David Goggins, the Navy SEAL who was this sort of fat, overweight guy who then turned himself into one of the great ultra athletes in the world, he has the title of his book is You Can't Hurt Me. And there comes a time when you realize that letting people hurt you is a choice. And it sounds cheesy, but being bitter and angry is a choice that you can make. And if you when you read the book, you'll realize that we didn't use the name of anyone who was mean to me. It's not because I don't remember. I do. And my sister really remembers. She may not have the same level of forgiveness and lack of bitter and anger that I, but I think it became that you could either decide to be bitter or angry, or you could just decide that their best years were in high school and now I'm me. And that to me has always been the best anecdote. And at some point you kind of accept you can either be bitter and angry, or you can be happy and sort of live your life. And that was a decision I made. And that was in the book. It sort of came late in high school.
How do you see NewsNation's position in 5 years compared to Fox and CNN? We live like year to year, guys.
I was going to say, I'm still waiting for Thursday's ratings. I think it's a great question. I'll give you a little bit of what I think is happening in the media, since you may be of interest. I'm not sure a journalist ever makes a great media critic, but the reason NewsNation is growing is because there's people like you all who want news that does not cheerlead one side or the other. And what makes NewsNation different is that we are willing to give each side their best argument and then pick that argument apart, rather than having the sacrificial lamb. You know, you'll find Democrats on Fox, and you'll find Republicans on MSNBC or CNN, but they are effectively sacrificial lambs.
Yeah, the punching bag, the
to be
pinata.
there.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you had a great fight, but now we're,
Yeah.
Thank you. So they're the bull in the bullfight. They always lose. The way I would describe it is the following, which is at 9 p.m., I know what's going to happen, or 8 p.m. Central. Sean Hannity's going to come on every night, and he's going to say, Donald Trump is doing 4D underwater chess. And he's going to have a guest who's going to come on and say, no, Sean, you don't understand. It is 5D underwater chess. Caitlin Collins is going to come on and roll a bunch of sound and then ask some snarky fact-check question and raise an eyebrow. And
She does have good eyebrows, though. The way she can kind of, it's like a, sorry. I mean, I'm watching you at that hour.
Ben notices interesting things.
As I say, my job, I'm a trained observer of the human condition. It's what a journalist is.
True, and a good one. Then Jen Psaki or Rachel Maddow will come on and say that tomorrow at noon, the Republic is over and fascism is upon us, and the guest will say, no, you don't understand. It really is happening right now. We don't have till noon tomorrow. So the reason NewsNation is the only cable news channel that is growing is because at 9 o'clock every night, or 8 o'clock, we're different. Mm-hmm. And that to me is sort of where I see things, is that I think that, you know, the world sort of divided and enjoyed going into their mutual camps. The problem for Fox and MS is that in order to continue to get that viewer, they have to keep being more and more extreme, whereas our viewers are effectively, the more Fox and MS and CNN become extreme and cater to the extremes, the more viewers that leaves us in the middle.
But isn't it interesting that the one cable network that was created to cover sports, ESPN, is in the financial fight for its life? And we have 4 or so cable news channels covering the sport of politics, and they're the most successful cable channels. I actually think that that's not a great thing.
Well,
because when
politics has replaced sports in America.
Exactly, and that's a big problem.
It used to be, right, that you could that Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears fans would yell and scream at each other in bars, and you could talk about how much you hated each other, but you were talking about something that didn't matter, no one really cared about, so everybody just drank beer afterwards and had fun. That no longer is the case, because now your politics somehow represents your morality, and now you're fighting about things that people actually feel is a representation of someone else's morality or virtue, and you're defined by that, your political viewpoints. And yeah, that is a very good point.
But do you think if politics are a pendulum, and they do swing from side to side, tough on crime, soft on crime, welcome everybody, slam the border door shut. Do you think the pendulum of the sport of politics will also swing back, and we'll go back to having boring politicians who don't make news?
No. And I'll tell you why. Because the economic incentive is the other way. Mm-hmm. So if you follow the money, and now I'll go even deeper into the state of the media if anybody is interested. the reason there was sort of a middle of America that came together and had a common understanding of facts and everything else was because you had, in most cities, 1, maybe 2 newspapers, and you had 3, maybe 4 television stations. And nationally, you had 3 television networks, NBC, ABC, CBS. They were broadcasters, they were broadsheet newspapers. They had to make money, appeal to the broadest possible audience, as did politicians. Yeah. Now, if you think there are pink dinosaurs that are going to take over America tomorrow, there is a YouTube channel for you. Mm-hmm. There is. And more importantly, that YouTube creator can make a decent amount of money talking every day about pink dinosaurs. You never have to entertain that pink dinosaurs may not take over tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It just is never a thought you have to entertain. So the financial incentives for politicians in order to get on cable news, get clicks on social media, fundraise, those financial incentives are all about being more extreme. Now, the anecdote to that may be, right, something really terrible happening that would require us to come together, right? A 9/11-like thing. The scary part is the last really terrible thing to happen in America, right? You had 9/11, we all came together after 9/11, we remember that. The last really terrible thing to happen in America was COVID. And it actually drove us farther apart.
Right. Because there was no allowance, as there is no allowance in our cable news and politics, there's no allowance for that 2 things can be right at the same time, right? COVID can be a deadly disease that killed millions of people prematurely, while at the same time the solution to COVID may not have been to shut down all the schools, right? But if you watch cable news or listen to our political debate, there is no room for middle ground. I was talking with somebody about it the other day as it relates to immigration and the Safety Act, which I know is something that I'm sure you all have thought about, and that is, Governor Pritzker, right? Why hasn't he moved more to the middle to say, okay, we'll hand over, like if you're in this country illegally and you get charged with a new crime, or you've been convicted of a crime, we'll hand you over and you can be deported. Well, he can't do that because then he loses the Democratic primary, or he looks like he's caving to Donald Trump, which is the ultimate sin for a Democrat, right? There's no allowance for, and there's also no allowance for, in that middle ground, well, what happens to the victim's family? Like if an illegal immigrant kills somebody, and then we as a society say, oh no, we're not going to charge him, we're just going to deport him, then there's no justice, right? There's no punishment. And that's what our political debate doesn't have today. I'm sorry, I just went off on a tangent.
I was going to say, we've come a long way from, it's just nice to get everybody together and just talk, right, about a nice story.
Yeah, sorry about that. All right, let's go back to the cards. What has been the biggest surprise for you since your book has been published?
It's a great question, and it's the response. It's the hundreds of emails from people and from families who say, we don't feel alone anymore. And what this was supposed to be, Ben, was not a political conversation. We were supposed to.
It was a middle ground conversation.
So go try to find something that on the right that Steve Bannon thinks is fantastic and Joe Scarborough on the left thinks is absolutely fantastic. There's not a lot of things. And we really thought about, before the book was published, all of the ways that it could be criticized, or it could become a negative for me or negative for the network or whatever else. And the thing that really surprised, I think, all of us was how incredibly grateful and warm the reception has been.
Maybe this is a lame attempt to salvage my tangent, but I would actually argue that your book is an example of the middle ground, right? Because for a long time, it was, let us cater to everybody's adversity. And I think your book is saying, well, here's what happens when you don't. And yes, maybe if you have a more severe form of autism, it's not as easily doable, but maybe the answer isn't here or here, but somewhere in here.
You want a shovel?
Do I have to dig myself out?
No, I
Yeah,
think.
but that's kind of
No,
what we're
it's a
talking
very
about,
good
right?
point. I think, though, really what it is also, I think, showed is how much people wanted a story of hope. Mm-hmm. And we're happy that they could sort of see, and parents aren't told enough. You know, for a long time, and I mean this with no disrespect for your wife, but parents have been told basically the experts know best, the teachers know best, you have to sort of obey whatever they say and whatever the diagnosis is, and you have to cater it. And there's a lot of parents now who are saying, I have a lot of agency. As a parent, I have a lot of power, and I have a real say here. And I think that's one of the reasons it resonated.
Last question. You write about the importance of goals in Born Lucky. What is your next goal, professionally or personally, Leland?
Well, beat Ben Bradley at golf.
Easily done.
It's a great question. It's actually a way more important question than I think anyone really realizes. And I would say right now, my goal is to, professionally, is to make my show the best show it can be every day and to keep growing. That's diametrically opposed to what my dad pushed me to do, which is to set long-range goals. And to set long-range goals, to think about them, and to make those goals really hard to obtain. And the answer right now is I haven't figured out what that long-range, I would say what the long-range goal is right now is to beat Caitlin Collins at 9 p.m. is in terms of ratings. And that's sort of, it's no different than when I was a rower, which is the goal was to make the junior national team by lowering my time to this. It's the same kind of fight.
Gonna have to work on the eyebrow raise.
I'll see if I can get some more Botox.
Oh.
Thank you all. Julie, thank you. Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Thank you all, and we invite you to come to the Culbertson Room through the double doors for coffee and cookies and to buy a book and get a book signed by Leland. Thank you for coming.